Hello class. The film that I will be analyzing for my midterm project is Tampopo, which is a Japanese film directed by Yuzo Itami in 1985. Tampopo is structured in a comedic manner, very much like a sports or martial arts training film, similar to something like Rocky or The Karate Kid. The central story follows Tampopo, who is a ramen shop owner who is determined to perfect her ramen recipe and revitalize her small shop in the eyes of the local people. The film introduces two main characters, two truck drivers named Goro and Gun, who stop by her shop, taste her ramen, and decide that they need to help her improve her recipe. Goro becomes her mentor, and together they assemble a team of experts who each teach her a different aspect of ramen making. The film utilizes a series of training montage sequences, and through that, Tampopo is able to slowly master her craft, transforming both her cooking and also her confidence as a person. The main narrative of the film mirrors what most people would call a hero's journey, similar to something, as I mentioned earlier, that you might see in a classic sports film. Throughout the main storyline and the hero's journey, the film also intersperses quite a few short vignettes or stories that often explore other people's relationships with food, and each of the side stories uses food as somewhat of a metaphor for things like human connection or life lessons, which really expand the messaging of the film. One of the major themes in Tampopo is the pursuit of perfection. The whole film centers around Tampopo's mission to create her perfect bowl of ramen. And in a way, her constant trial and error becomes somewhat of a metaphor for dedication and pride in one's craft. It shows how even something as simple as making noodles can be treated as an art form. Another key theme in the film is the idea of community. Even though Tampopo's dream is somewhat of a personal dream, she wouldn't be able to accomplish it without the community of people like Goro, Gun, or the group of experts that they assemble to help her with this mission. And not only that, but the film does a really good job kind of showcasing how food can bring people together and how a shared goal like the one that they have can create a sense of community and a sense of connection. The theme of community also kind of goes hand in hand with another theme of mentorship and the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. In the film, Goro acts as a sort of mentor to Tampopo, helping her develop her skills and not only that, but develop her confidence. But the relationship also goes both ways, and she's able to inspire him too. And the relationship of a mentor and mentee is conveyed as one that involves a lot of collaboration and mutual respect, and is shown in a really positive light throughout the film. Lastly, one of the major themes that is explored in the film is the connection between food and sensuality. Eating food in the film is conveyed as incredibly pleasurable, a very intimate act, and a very emotional act. Some of the most famous scenes from the film, especially the vignettes, often show lovers using food in very romantic ways. And one of the key connections is how desire and appetite can be very closely linked. The set design in the film is largely centered around Tampopo's ramen shop, which becomes somewhat the heart of the film. At the beginning of the film, the shop does feel a bit cluttered and run down, but it also has a kind of sense of homey warmth. And it also seems to have a lot of potential, which draws a tie directly to Tampopo herself. As Tampopo grows throughout the film, the ramen shop itself transforms in a similar fashion. As Tampopo's character arc develops, the shop is improved and eventually remodeled, and the physical change of the shop kind of gives the audience sort of a visual way to track and feel her progress in real time. The film also does a great job of treating the food itself as pieces of art. Every dish throughout the film is showed in great detail, from the textures to the steam coming off of it to the rich colors. They are all carefully framed in shots to convey them as incredibly beautiful and meaningful. And it's very clear that the filmmakers wanted to present the food as not just something to eat, but as something that should be admired and respected. While the sets and settings of the main storyline all have kind of a similar look and feel to them, the sets within the short vignettes that are interspersed throughout the film often have very different look and tone to them, which allows them to kind of live in their own visual world that lets you know that they are in fact separate from the main story. One of the aspects of the cinematography in the film is how within the main storyline, the camera often uses long takes and static shots, which tend to give the scenes a kind of calm, grounded feeling. And it kind of lets the audience just sit with the characters as they eat and talk, and it kind of allows us as viewers to feel like we're in the ramen shop with them. A contrasting aspect of the cinematography in the film is how the short vignettes are shot. They're shot in a much more chaotic, experimental style. There's a lot more camera movement, a lot more fast camera movement, different angles, and the energy is totally different from vignette to vignette, which it kind of helps the short stories stay in their own world and feel much different from the main storyline. Another great aspect of the cinematography is the repeated use of close-up shots on the food. The use of close-up shots makes each dish that appears in the film feel almost like a piece of art, something that you need to focus on. And they do a good job showing the texture of the food, from things like the steam rising off of it or the oil sitting on top of the broth. All these details really make the viewer feel like they need to put extra importance on the shots of food. There's a significant focus on using extremely wide shots when the film is showing people at the ramen counter, which is used to emphasize kind of the community aspect of the ramen shop and the social aspect of eating, constantly showing people side by side, talking, slurping the ramen, and developing connection. There's also use of kind of warm, low lighting in these scenes, which adds to that homey feeling of the shop and kind of the sense of comfort that people feel when they come there. One aspect of the editing in Tampopo is the way they use fast cuts during the kind of more rhythmic action parts of the film, such as Tampopo's training sequences. They use a lot of fast cuts to make it feel almost more like as I mentioned earlier, fight movie montage. But in contrast, in the quieter, more intimate moments, like in the ramen shop, the shots are a lot more static and drawn out, allowing us to take in all of kind of the intimate detail. When transitioning between the main storyline and the short vignettes, the editors opted to use just really abrupt cuts as opposed to any sort of fade outs or transitions, which keeps the pacing of the film very unpredictable but exciting for the viewer. And it reminds you that while these short vignettes are different storylines, they are all grounded in the same themes as the main storyline. There's a certain comedic rhythm to the editing. As I've mentioned a few times, the pacing kind of mimics the feel of those like action montage sports films, which makes the training scenes feel really dramatic when it's in reality just making food. And not only that, but the editors do a really good job of using kind of perfectly timed cuts to punctuate jokes when a one-liner is delivered or something like that. The cuts are timed up so that the jokes land every time. The sound design in Tampopo makes heavy use of Foley sounds, mostly food Foley sounds, things like oil sizzling in the pan or broth bubbling, or the main one being noodles being slurped, which is a very recurring thing in the film. The sounds are turned up very loud in the mix, almost aggressively, so that these scenes with food being consumed or cooked feel very alive and make the viewer almost feel as if they're in the kitchen themselves. There's often a complete lack of background or ambient noise in combination with the food Foley sounds, which really helps the food sounds to stand out even more. And kind of by taking away the ambient distraction, the film really forces us to focus on, every little sound that the food is making, almost turning it into an extra musical element to the score. The score itself has kind of a playful, energetic feel. It uses a lot of brass and string instruments, and it uses a lot of the same instrumentation you would hear in spaghetti western films. Tampopo is actually often called a ramen western, but the music does a really good job of kind of keeping everything light and adding to the comedic nature of the film. In many moments, you hear these big orchestral swells that sound like they would be in some sort of dramatic action film, except they, a lot of the time, get used in totally mundane situations like tasting the soup or fixing up the shop. And the kind of ironic contrast of that really continues to add to the comedic element in the film. The acting style in Tampopo is usually very expressive and full of personality. A lot of it relies on physical movements or expressive body language. As a viewer, you can kind of read the emotion through small gestures like how the characters are eating, their facial expressions, or how they kind of physically react to one another. There's a pretty noticeable contrast between the acting in the main storyline and in the short vignettes. In Tampopo's storyline, a lot of the acting feels very natural and kind of grounded in reality, while in the vignettes, a lot of the acting is more exaggerated, kind of hyper-stylized performances to kind of build on the humor of the scenes. The dialogue is very measured and very deliberate, especially in the intimate moments between characters. There's an emphasis on kind of subtle pauses after lines are delivered, and those pauses and kind of the quiet exchanges make the conversations feel very human, almost like the viewer is kind of just, as I mentioned earlier, sitting in with the characters. One major element to the cultural impact of Tampopo was the fact that it's often seen as the beginning of the modern food film. It's kind of one of the first films to use food not just as a prop, but as I mentioned earlier, a metaphor for life and personal growth. And that kind of approach to food was added to a lot of later films that kind of treat cooking and eating as almost emotional storytelling. The film also helped to kind of popularize the connection between food and sensuality, which kind of almost coined the term food porn. A lot of the close-up shots of the noodles, the broth, and the great detail on the textures made eating almost feel romantic. And it's a style that definitely became a huge trend in movies and also advertising going forward. Outside of the food aspect, Tampopo also stood out because of the structure, the kind of unusual episode-like structure where the vignettes are kind of randomly interspersed into the main storyline. The kind of fragmented style was very different from the traditional linear storytelling that a lot of Japanese filmmakers were using at the time. And it definitely influenced a lot of the later filmmakers who wanted to experiment with these kind of non-linear narratives. Another important aspect of the film's impact is the feminist undertone. Tampopo's journey as a woman running her own shop and working hard to master her craft was a pretty powerful message at the time in the 1980s in Japan, where female independence wasn't often celebrated on screen. And it definitely felt pretty symbolic of progress and female empowerment. The film also kind of pokes fun at cultural etiquette in dining manner, especially in the differences between Japanese and Western dining manners. A lot of the vignettes use kind of humor to provide commentary on the differences between these cultures. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed, and if you haven't already, I hope you go watch Tampopo.